Hello and welcome to the Ratio Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Ray, and as always, we are recording from beautiful downtown Athens, Georgia. It's good to be back with you here in December. We had a really great live show in November. No regular episodes were released, but we did release the Tears for the Dying live show, and that's on our YouTube channel. Just make sure to go into YouTube, type the Ratio Podcast, and that's where you can find all of our live shows. So we've got 3 more episodes for you before the end of the year, and the first one is tonight on the show. We have journalist, author, and all-around badass Martin Popoff. He'll be discussing his new book on the damned lively arts, The Damned Deconstructed. You can pick it up at Martin's website, and we'll have all that info for you in the interview proper. So that'll be coming up in just a few. Before we get going here, I want to thank everybody for all the awesome support for the Attila episode. He's a super cool dude, and we were so fortunate to get that chat with him, so I want to thank everybody for checking it out and downloading it. We'll be taking a quick break at the beginning of the new year, and then raging back, with episodes and the live show that I'd mentioned. So we're planning to have 2023 as our best year yet. And we thank you for the support along the way. So before I get to the interview with Mr. Popoff, I just want to remind everybody that all updates for live shows, episodes, and everything can be found on our website at www.ratiopodcast.com. And you can also check us out on our socials on Instagram and Facebook. So please welcome to the show tonight, Mr. Martin Popoff. All righty, Ratio Podcast, and we are here with one of my absolute heroes, Mr. Martin Popoff, journalist, author, and all-around badass. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing okay, Johnny. Looking forward to talking about some Damned.
Hell cool. Yeah. We're going to talk about one of my favorite bands of all time, The Damned. And Martin has just released an excellent book, Lively Arts, The Damned Deconstructed. So, Martin, tell me a little bit about how this whole project came together.
Well, this is one I've wanted to do for a long, long time. I mean, I did 2 similar books in terms of the writing. Now, I'll get to that in a second. But I've done Led Zeppelin, all the albums, all the songs, and I've done The Clash, all the albums, all the songs. And those came out through Quarto, Voyager, Motor Books, whatever you want to call them. Big, really nice American publisher, big, really good design. And I had actually gotten a deal to do this book through a different publisher, but then we kind of had a falling out with how long it was going to take. So basically, I ended up doing it with my UK publisher, Weimer. So we got it out. It's just a trade paperback, unlike the Zeppelin and the Clash. So it's black and white throughout, but it is probably my favorite book I've ever done, because I loved writing about this. It's essentially, 400, 500 words of hard graft on every single Damned song. So, the inspiration and the methodology is exactly like my Led Zeppelin and the Clash one. There's a long intro on each album and then go into each song, boom, 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 separately kind of thing. So yeah, that's how it came about. I'm just a huge fan like you of the Damned. I always thought this would be a cool thing to do. I didn't really know how commercial it would be, but I think there is a lot of interest. One thing I have noticed is I've always been pleasantly surprised when I've done a book on a smaller band. It always does better than the books on the big bands. So it usually works out, but that is yet to be seen because it just came out last week.
Well, when you talk about these deep dives that you do, once you get this process going, I'm fascinated about that. By that, when you take a band, when you take the Clash or Zeppelin and now the Damned, and you go through every song, is it a straight process, or is it just something you want? Once you get going, you just keep rolling with it, or you come back to it and take breaks?
Well, I definitely go in order, because there's no reason going out of order, and there's some really good, smart logistical reasons to do that. You don't want to be introducing characters or saying things later on that should have been said earlier on, kind of thing, like full names of someone or whatever, right? And so yeah, I start at the beginning because I figure you may as well. And the other reason I like starting at the beginning is because I feel like the beginning stuff is the hardest stuff, because that's where you kind of got to slowly infuse the history of the band into it. That first long intro, I think, yeah, I did a long intro in this book and then an intro to the first album, Damned, Damned, Damned. And yeah, the other thing, by the way, is these are non-interview type books. It's pure analysis, but having talked to the Damned quite a few times, I've actually used a lot of my interview stuff and used it in the intro parts of these things. But yeah, so you just start chronologically and work your way through it, and that way you also get a better look at the evolution of what's going on. When they're adding little bits of keyboards and garage rock and whatever, and new member comes on. Here's the first album with them. Here's the second album with them. So yeah, it's best with these things just to start right at the beginning.
Right. And, damned couldn't be a better place to begin.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, what was it initially when you were younger? What was it that got you into the Damned? What was it that, there's so many things you mention in the book, but like, what was it that got you into the Damned initially?
Wow. So, I was probably me and my buddies were all like absolute uncompromising metalheads. It had to be heavy or we didn't care, right? And so that started, so I'm 59 now. That started about 1972, 1971. Definitely by 1973, by 10 years old, I was on my way to being a music maniac. So 73 up to punk. Punk comes out. I remember seeing right on CBC News in our small town, Trail, British Columbia, Canada, right? I remember seeing a news report of live shows and the punters gobbing all over it was fascinating, right? And then the trips to Spokane, Washington, where you would get imports and stuff. That's where I started buying, the punk albums. And, punk just exactly like grunge later compared to hair metal, right?
Right.
Exactly in the same way. There were certain things about punk that made it heavier than the heavy metal that I knew, right? It was more chaotic and meaner and menacing, and the vocals were more extreme and the production was more extreme. So just everything. Well, you were talking about Maiden. I mean Mayhem off air, right?
Yeah.
The whole idea with black metal. So it's the same kind of thing. So as your tastes become more sophisticated, by 1977, we were at least smart enough to realize that there were other ways to be heavy than Derringer Sweet Evil or
Right.
Ted Nugent Weekend Warriors, right? You hear the Sex Pistols album and you're a little scared in some way and you don't know why. You're 14 years old, something's bothering you about this. Or you hear Damned, Damned, Damned and it's like, this is so wild and chaotic, and look at these guys, like look how they're dressed. They obviously don't care about being chased down the street and beaten up and stuff. We didn't know anything about that at that point. That's stories we heard later, right? But
right.
You just realize that, and then you just get this feeling that, wow, London, Britain must be a scary place. Society's about to break down completely, right? With this punk stuff. So yeah, we were quite captivated by the whole punk thing. And like I say, just like Nirvana and Mudhoney and Alice in Chains and not so much Pearl Jam, but a lot of those bands, you notice that there was a new kind of heaviness over and above hair metal. And that's what was so exciting about grunge. It was the same with punk.
Yeah. And, you talk about like hindsight on these things. I look at the Damned especially, and Lemmy used to mention this a lot about this, the rock and roll nature of the Damned, and just what a just straight out rock and roll band they are still to this day. But when you go back, all these things like Sex Pistols, The Clash, they really start taking on that classic that this was not a fad. This was amazing music that just keeps growing. Its fangs seem to get, sharper as the years go on. But what would you consider them now more, a punk band or a rock band?
Wow. They're pretty much uncategorizable, I suppose.
Yeah.
But and I wouldn't call them. I would never call them a rock band because I think that's almost like just an abdication of trying to put them into a genre, right? So I would say the interesting thing about the Damned, actually, come to think of it, I've never really thought about Johnny. That's a really cool question. I would actually almost call them a punk band again, because you look at the likes of basically everything from Not of This Earth and Grave Disorder and So Who's well, not so much So Who's Paranoid, and definitely not so much the last album, Evil Spirits, but there's a lot of punk back in what they did, because when punk got big again, the Damned kind of got punkier again, right? And whether it's Rat Scabies drumming or not, it didn't matter. I mean, Pinch was just as heavy metal and hard rock and punky as Rat could be, right? So they went back and did a good dose of punk later, and then they of course were a good dose of punk certainly across the first 3 albums and into the next couple, and they really only had that short-lived gothic period. So Who's Paranoid's really kind of cool, but it's a mix, and then they're definitely, the last album was a bit of a disappointment, and it's not punky at all, and it was very behaved on the Tony Visconti production. The other thing that you could call them, which is kind of a weird, watery term, is a new wave band. I'm just about to do I'm about to do my 170th episode of History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff, and I'm gonna do it on short-lived genres, and I'm going to talk about this whole punk versus new wave versus post-punk thing. So Damned had not so much of the post-punk thing, but they certainly had the new wave and they had the punk. But I literally, to net it out, Johnny, I'd probably just call them a punk band.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned an album like So Who's Paranoid. You take a song like Nature's Dark Passion on that album, and that almost being something, just a musical drama in a way, but there's something punk rock about them making a song that bold,
Yeah. And the other thing, Johnny, come to think of it, the other thing that they maintained quite a bit of, but in different ways along the way, is the goth. You bring that up, right? So that's a good example, and that album in general. So in a certain sense, they invented goth with the whole Dave Vanian look right there on the very first punk album out of Britain. Damned. So they were kind of so somewhat goth to begin with, a little bit. Then they got more goth. I mean, even the garage rock years, those years I love, of the Black Album and Strawberries, that of era.
God, I love
bit of goth in there. Then they became a full-on goth band, and then just like kind of the punk came back, the goth was retained all throughout as well. So they're pretty big. They're pretty big in the whole goth conversation too.
Yeah. There's just this very grand feeling to their music. I mean, even in those albums you're talking about, like Strawberries in particular, I talked to so many people who've gone back and rediscovered that record. There's just so many great songs on there. Like Under the Floor Again, Ignite. And I know Ignite's off of it. Yeah, Ignite's off Strawberries. Yes.
Yeah.
But so go back to one thing I'm very curious about. You when you take on a project like this, take an album like Machine Gun Etiquette that you've listened to, I'm assuming thousands of times. When you go back into it, how many new things, when you take a critical eye under something in a project like this, how many new things you discover that you just weren't paying attention to before?
Well, first off, I always think of that question, that interesting thing. How many times have you really listened to your favorite albums, right? Yes. I think thousands is definitely an exaggeration. I don't think there's too many albums any of us have listened to thousands of times, but hundreds of times. But I also have that philosophical pondering sometimes, is like, will I ever hear Kiss Hotter Than Hell again before I die, right?
Right.
Pretty interesting, eh? But yeah, so the cool thing about the Damned is, and the whole thing about this process as well, which I went through with Zeppelin and Clash, there's so much trivia associated with the songs that you can, research and find and see in interviews and whatnot. But also with the Damned, it's perfect. They're a perfect sort of headphones kind of band because there's always little ear candy things going on, little soundtracky moments and spoken word and little jokes and different sounds because they're such musicologists. They're so into so many things. Like even on a big noisy album like Machine Gun Etiquette, you can tell they're already bringing in their 60s influences in a big way. And you mentioned rock and rollsiness early on and what Lemmy said about them. I don't know if I hear too much traditional rock and roll in the Damned, but what I hear is a love of rock and roll history in the Damned and all the different kinds of rock and roll along the way. But yeah, so I remember this with the Zeppelin thing. Part of that, hearing about how attentive Jimmy Page is to the sound and remastering and remixing and all that stuff, and how the extra bonus tracks on all the reissues, they didn't really have that many extra songs, so it's more like slight variations of things. That's where that putting on the headphones on and hearing what's going from left channel to right channel or stays in the left channel or whatever, little percussion touches. So yeah, that made this project more fun even than the Zeppelin and the Clash, because there was always little crazy, stupid little ear candy trivia things in almost every song to talk about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, getting back to what Lemmy was talking about, it feels like more of a vibe they had, a rock and roll vibe. They have that spirit of rock and roll, and every time I've seen them live, it's like I've always felt that here's the real deal coming on the stage, and there's such a group of characters, and you've got the captain out there. Just it's such a interesting, unique band. When's the first time? Let's get into your history with the band, your personal history here. When was the first time you interviewed the Damned, and who was it?
Okay, so I really only got into this business in about 93, 94, right? So I'm kind of late to this. People sometimes think, oh, I remember reading you in Kerrang and all this, and I always get kind of embarrassed and sort of, oh, do I correct them or not, sort of thing. I wasn't around back then, right? So we started Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles magazine in 94 with Tim Henderson. It's Tim's baby, and we've got bravewords.com still. So as the years go on, and also I'm telling you all this because I only moved to Toronto in 89. So I've been more or less in not very big towns all over the place anyways, right?
Right.
So seeing bands live was spotty until I got here. So anyways, I believe the first time might have been a phoner, and I'm totally forgetting that. And I'm not sure if it was the first time, but my main fond memory is when they actually came to town. They were on the Grave Disorder tour, and I got to sit down. We got to go upstairs in Lee's Palace to, nice open empty ballroom that I didn't even know existed, and just sat in there with Captain and Dave.
Wow.
Got my stuff signed and everything, and had just a lovely chat with them. And then after that, there's just been phoners on and on. I've seen them live again once or twice. So I haven't really seen them live too many times. Three max, possibly just two. But yeah, phoners along the way, various members. A good variety of members. So there's definitely some really nice quotes throughout this book. But and always great interviews with those guys. They always have interesting things to say. Back to the Lemmy rock and roll thing. I think the beating heart of the rock and roll of the band, the Ace Frehley of the band in a way, is Brian James.
Oh yeah.
And the reason I say that is, man, go listen to some of his later solo albums. They are amazing. He is so heavy and punk. I mean, they sound like a cross between Machine Gun Etiquette and the first album. They are really, really kind of cool. So yeah, he's really impressed me with his solo career, that guy. But yeah, I mean, they're all pretty rock and roll in their own way.
Oh yeah, I've met Dave and Captain and the Captain, and both of them. Everything you've ever dreamt in your mind, when you meet those cats. Now you look at where they're going. How much longer do you see them, doing the good work of the Damned?
Well, they just put out a live album. Fortunately, it is a live album, so I didn't have to go and rewrite any of this damn book. Um, but so they did that. They still seem to. You look at them live. I mean, I saw them live not too long ago. They seem to be in relatively good health. I haven't heard of any health scares of the other type, but I mean just their physiques and everything, and their energy on stage, and they mix out a few members here and there. They got a new drummer recently, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I could see them. I could see them keeping on doing it. They seem to be getting along. That last studio album wasn't that long ago, and then they did the Rockfield Files, right? Um, yeah, I could see another studio album out of these guys or two. But they're everybody's getting on. They gotta be in their 70s or whatever at this point. I would think, or 70-ish. So yeah, I think they had a good experience making that last album, but I think that last album, I'm not the only one who was a little disappointed in it. I've noticed over the years now since that people definitely grumble about that album. It was a little too behaved.
Right, right, right. Well, what do you think? What do you think now they have left to explore? Do you think it's just working with super quality producers like Visconti, or do you think they would be better self-producing themselves in a way?
Wow, that's a good question. I That's a really good question. I would think the next thing that I would do if I were them, or if I was a really good manager who was managing them, which probably I don't even have a manager at this point. Who knows, right?
Right.
That the whole story of the Damned and the business is just a disaster, right? But say they had a super smart, sophisticated, strategizing manager. I think what you just suggested would be a great idea. Don't work with Tony Visconti again, but find another big producer who can really motivate you, because I do believe they do have a slight motivation problem. In getting together, they take a long time to do things. So I think that fourth or fifth, no, well, fifth or sixth member of the band, whatever it is, would be pretty important. So that's a really good idea. I think they should find another super smart, assertive producer, maybe like a Bob Ezrin,
Oh, that would be amazing.
to work with them, right? And I say that about Bob Ezrin. I've talked to Bob many times. I almost consider him an acquaintance at this point, but I don't think Bob particularly most times out gets all that great a sound out of a lot of bands. Having said that, the Deep Purple albums sound amazing, but what everybody says about Bob Ezrin is he's an absolute drill sergeant there. He will get in there and tear apart the songs with you. He works fast. He wants to tell you what's good, what's bad, do that again. He's really good at all that stuff. But I think there's a slight untold story with Bob Ezrin that runs along the lines of, what, Bob, a whole lot of your albums sound pretty cardboardy. There's not a lot of bass and treble on some of those records you've made with some of these artists, right? So I don't think he's always gotten an amazing sound out of bands.
Well, but like you said, I remember I saw Nine Inch Nails this weekend, and when The Fragile came out, I remember seeing Ezrin's name. It wasn't the producer, but I still remember seeing his name down in the credits. Just basically, it talked to Trent about how to get his arms around all this goddamn material, and you see what he did with other things, but I think he's really good at that, pulling a project together and seeing what's But then at the same time, you've got one of my guilty pleasures, which I don't have guilty pleasures, but music from The Elder. There's something about thinking about a coked out Bob Ezrin recording Kiss that never ends, just never ceases to fascinate me.
Yeah, funny, yeah. And that album actually does sound pretty good, and Destroyer sounds really good. So I guess when I grouse, because actually at the same time I got my Damned books, I got my two new Alice Cooper books, which is my old big Alice Cooper book busted into two and turned into a trade paperback. It's a timeline and quotes book. So one of them is the original Alice Cooper band, and one of them is the solo years. But my point is that I don't think a single one of those Alice Cooper band albums sounds particularly good.
Right.
I don't think there's enough bass and enough treble, and I don't think the drums sound very good. They sound like basically your tone is on default middle 0 o'clock.
Right.
To me, I think "Welcome to My Nightmare" sounds good, and that's also Bob Ezrin. But and like I say, I think all the stuff he's done with Deep Purple lately sounds not only amazing, but it sounds kind of unique too. The sounds he gets on those Deep Purple albums is almost like Metallica level. We're trying something different, and we're going for different and good at the same time, which is a rare thing.
Oh, I so agree. Recent Deep Purple, that's a whole nother podcast. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, getting back to the Damned, there's so many things. The first UK punk band to tour America. First band, T-Rex taking them on tour. So many firsts with the Damned that are kind of gotcha firsts. How do you think, though, overall, the Damned will go down in rock and roll in music history?
Well, I think the cool thing about it is that they will go down as a very varied band who had success in a number of different areas. And those three areas, broadly speaking, I think are punk, goth, and longevity. So they're a band that's been around. They participated in the world in the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s. They've played live. They've done interviews. So that's the longevity part. So they're like a legacy punk band, because there's a lot of punk bands, who is a legacy punk band. It's not the Pistols. It's not the Ramones. It's not the Clash. Has anybody lasted? From those days, I guess some people like UK Subs and Vibrators on kind of a low hum, so definitely they're going to go down as one of the key punk bands of all time. One of the big four, I guess, come to think of it. I never thought of punk as a big four, but you think of Pistols, Clash, Ramones, and the Damned. Maybe
you said it. Martin Popoff said it right here.
I guess that's it. Yeah, the big four. And yeah, they are a huge. People forget about Dave Vanian inventing goth in '77, but when you get to Phantasmagoria, a lot of people say, I guess they aren't inventing goth at that point, but they're almost being one of the early most committed and having the entire goth package all at the same time at that point, which is kind of cool. So yeah, they're highly regarded in the goth world, which is kind of cool as well.
Yeah, and they have the songs, man. There's so much. It all comes down to the music and the songs, and they've just got, like you were talking about, so many interesting things going on these recordings, but the songs are just so damn listenable. I mean, even a cover, the MC5 cover of "Looking at You," I mean, that'll change your body's chemistry if you put it on the right time.
Yeah. And "Alone Again," or for some reason, I really like that song on anything. I mean, anything's a bit of a denigrated album, but I really like that there. I like that way more than the UFO one, on Lights Out.
Oh yeah, I saw the Damned back in May, minus the Captain, at a festival out in Los Angeles. They had Troy from Queens of the Stone Age filling in, for the Captain.
Mm-hmm.
But going back, seeing, what were we just talking about? How seeing, I know I had a reason right there with the Captain. I had brought him up. Anyway, I'm sorry, I lost it. But
the longevity of the band.
Oh yes, no, they played that cover out there, and the crowd went crazy. And you're right, it is better than the UFO cover. So
they did Beatles' "Help." Remember that?
Yeah,
the frantic version of "Help." Yeah.
But seeing a crowd getting into that song, it gets people running back to check out the original, and I think the Damned are one of the best at doing that. So
yeah.
Well, Martin, where can everybody get the new book? And I want to remind everybody, Lively Arts, The Damned Deconstructed. Where's the best place for people to get in touch with you and get the book and your other books?
Definitely martinpopoff.com. A big part of my income is the mail order of my own books. So I sign them and send them out from here in Toronto. It's all there with the PayPal buttons. Anything that's in print is there. It's just in a long scroll. You can go down, a lot of detail on every book. But yeah, martinpopoff.com for all the books.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Martin. I know we do this from time to time. We need to do it again real soon, man.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Oh, man, isn't he cool? I just want to thank Mr. Martin Popoff for coming on the Ratio podcast and talking about the book on the Damned. Make sure to go pick it up for you or your loved one, or, just to support Martin and his righteous quest to document all these awesome bands. So thanks so much for tuning in tonight. Stay switched on, and we'll talk to you soon.